At some point when we were all learning how to play our instruments, we all had the thought of, should I learn music theory? Is it worth my time? I'm here to tell you it is. No matter what instrument you are trying to learn, music theory plays a crucial part in your music development. However, a lot of musicians find themselves asking, where do I begin when trying to learn music theory? Learning music theory can feel like trying to memorize some long algebraic formula. Luckily today, I have 3 beginner music theory topics that we can dive into that are relatively easy to comprehend. But without wasting any more time, let's dive into these 3 topics and get busy. Topic number 1, intervals. What is an interval? Have you ever taken a road trip anywhere? I'm sure along the way you've seen some of these signs. Mile markers, destination markers, distance markers, whatever you want to call them, but they tell you how far you've traveled or how far you have left to travel. Well, an interval is the same thing. An interval is the distance between 2 notes, telling you how far you are from one note to the next. One could even argue intervals are the distance markers for music notes. Now to show you how it works, I've laid out a traditional Western piano with 12 notes. Let me give you a real-world example. Let's take a C note and an E note on the piano. Now, we need to try to figure out how far away are these notes from each other. Well, we can figure that out using the interval chart that I have. This chart shows you the distance from C to every other note on the piano, including C all the way to E, showing that C to E is what you would call a major third. So the distance from C to E is a major third. So now we know C to E is a major third. Let's try another example. Now let's try C to F. What's the interval? Feel free to skip back and use the interval guide. If you guessed a perfect fourth, you're correct. C to F is a perfect fourth, going from the note C to the note F. Now, one of the best ways to learn intervals is to practice playing them on your instrument, going from one note to the next and back and forth. You can even use flashcards. It's a great way to practice. Topic number 2, scales. If you're a practicing musician, you obviously have heard of a scale, but you may not know what it is. Has anyone ever said to you, you need to get your ducks in a row? It may just be a silly old saying, but it kind of rings true to how a scale works. Imagine a specific set of ducks sitting in a specific row. A scale is very similar. A scale is a group of notes in a specific order, like the C major scale put up down here for reference. All these notes are in a particular order to form a C major scale. Now I'm sure you're thinking there's thousands of scales. What scales do I need to learn? There's actually a relatively easy answer to that question. There's 2 primary scales you need to learn. You need to learn a major scale and a minor scale. But if scales are composed of specific notes, how do I know which notes make that scale? Well, luckily for us, major and minor scales are composed of notes using whole steps and half steps, and each scale contains only 7 different notes. Now you may be wondering, what is a whole step and a half step? Whole steps and half steps are simple movements from note to note. They're another version of a distance marker and can even help you find certain intervals. Let me show you a brief whole step, half step example. Now as you can tell, notes C and D are labeled as a whole step. A whole step is simply playing a note 2 notes above our starting point. So instead of playing C sharp, right next to C, we go up and play D. Now a half step is just the opposite. Let's take a look at E and F. They're labeled as a half step. A half step is just playing the note immediately above or below the note you're starting on, the one right next to it. Let's try an example. Going from note A to note B. Is that a whole step or a half step? And if you guessed a whole step, you are correct. Going from A to B is a whole step. Let's try another example, going from note E to note E flat. Is that a whole step or half step? Well, if you guessed half step, you are correct. Now you may not have noticed while we were doing those examples, but the following notes below are the notes to a C major scale, and it shows the whole step, half step sequence that builds that C major scale. Now that sequence of whole steps and half steps can build any major scale in any key. Take G for example. The G major scale above is built on the same whole step, half step sequence that we just looked at. Start with any note and play the ascending whole and half step sequence above. You'll play the starting note's major scale. But now that we know the whole step, half step sequence that builds a major scale, spell out a D major scale using that sequence. Here's the correct answer. Now a minor scale works in a very similar way, except the whole step and half step sequence that builds the scale is just a little bit different. Here's the whole step and half step sequence that builds a minor scale. This one's in the key of A. But now that we know the whole step and half step sequences that build both major and minor scales, we can start building major and minor scales in all keys. Scales are crucial in your music development, especially when you're learning how to solo. Topic number 3, chord formulas. I'm sure at your favorite restaurant, your chef that prepares your favorite dish has some kind of recipe or formula that he tends to follow when making that order. Chord formulas are no different. Chord formulas are groupings of specific notes that compose chords. Let's take a look at this formula for a C major chord. Now it's a C chord and it's a C major chord. We have our notes laid out, which are C, E, and G, and we have a formula which is 1, 3, 5. Now I'm sure you want to know, what do the numbers mean? Well, remember a minute ago how we talked about intervals? If you go from C to E, which is a major third, which we looked at earlier, and you go from C to G, which is a perfect fifth, so a 3 and a 5, and you take C, which is the 1, so 1, 3, 5, you build a C major chord. C, E, and G are the notes that compose a C major chord, the 1, the 3rd, and the 5th. Now the cool part is you can do this for any major chord. You can find the 1, which is your starting note, the 3rd and the 5th, and build a major chord. Let's do an example. Let's figure out the notes that compose this G major chord. We know that G is our 1, but what is our 3rd and our 5th? Well, if you figured out that the 3rd is B and the 5th is D, you got it. Now there is a smattering of chords, all different kinds, major, minor, 7th, diminished, 11th, sus2s, so many chords, but luckily for you, all of these chords on this list and every chord in existence has a chord formula. And you can use that chord formula to figure out what the notes of the chord are. Once you master these 3 simple topics, it feels like you're crossing the finish line and getting somewhere. And the more you practice them, the better you'll get, no matter what instrument you play. I hope this lesson has been helpful regarding intervals, scales, and chord formulas. They're relatively easy topics to understand and grasp. But thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you guys aren't subscribed, subscribe to the channel and click that notification bell for me. Have a great day.